Euaoi. Survivor is probably one of the most, if not the most, influential reality TV show ever created. When the show first premiered back in the summer of 2000, it quickly became one of the most popular TV shows of its time. The concept of the show, being rather simple, involves abandoning 16 to 20 complete strangers in an isolated location, where they must work together to provide food, fire, and shelter for themselves while navigating the elements that the environment provides along with the social politics of their tribe. In every episode, the castaways compete in a variety of challenges, whether that would be testing the contestants' physical abilities like running or swimming, or their mental abilities like puzzles and endurance challenges. These challenges are run for either rewards and/or immunity from elimination. At the end of every episode, the castaways that aren't immune must head to this place called Tribal Council, where the castaways must individually vote one of their own off the show. This process continues until only one remains and is given the title of Sole Survivor and the $1 million check that comes with it. Over the years, the show has made some changes to the format while keeping the core gameplay intact. Such changes include, but are not limited to, tribe swaps where the people living in each tribe get swapped around, adding a new location where the castaways must live completely on their own for a little while, and even introducing new gameplay mechanics like the hidden immunity idol. What the hidden immunity idol is that an idol is hidden within the camp and the person who ends up finding it can keep it until Tribal Council, where the person can choose whether or not they want to play it, with all votes against that player at Tribal Council being negated if the person chooses to play it. These format changes don't always work, and some of the bad format changes have actually been a hindrance to the quality of the season that those changes have appeared in. In recent years, these format changes have been more missed than hit, which left many fans believing that the show has gotten too gimmicky. The most monumental change the show has witnessed throughout its entire run thus far was after the show's 40th season, Survivor Winners at War. This season felt like the end of an era to many fans. This is mainly because the season itself involved 20 returning players who have previously won the title of Sole Survivor compete against each other for a $2 million check. Aside from the epic concept, another reason why many fans consider Winners at War to be the end of an era is that immediately after the season aired, production for the show was halted due to the pandemic, and during the 16-month hiatus between the show's 40th and 41st season, the format of the show drastically changed, resulting in this new era that we know today. However, a lot of Survivor fans, and a good amount of former Survivor players think that most of these changes ended up hurting the show overall. There are 3 key areas I will cover regarding why I think these changes ended up hurting the show. These changes include the format aspect, the casting aspect, and the gameplay aspect. Let's start with the first aspect, that being the format. When the show's 41st and 42nd seasons started production back in 2021, the castaways had to quarantine upon arriving in Fiji for 2 weeks before starting the game. This resulted in the game's length getting reduced to 26 days compared to the standard 39-day length that was present on every season prior to this. To compensate for the shorter game length, the executives made the conditions more extreme for the players. Such conditions include offering fewer reward challenges, getting your flint taken away as a penalty for losing, and reducing the time between elimination as a way of trying to compress a 39-day game to 26 days. Jeff Probst has been trying to promote this 26-day game like it's some kind of monster, which just comes off as bogus and corny to me. While this format did work due to COVID protocols, Jeff Probst said that he thinks the show is never going to return to the traditional 39-day format even after all COVID restrictions have been removed. This is a problem because it just makes Jeff Probst and the CBS executives feel cheap. Sure, they try to make the 26 days more intense, but by doing that, they're doing away with a lot of rewards, fewer challenges to make, and fewer days the production crew needs to shoot. Those things I have just mentioned make the new era feel like low-budget Survivor, where they don't have to spend as much as they did on challenges, rewards, and filming compared to seasons past. In fact, the cast for both Survivor 41 and 42 were disappointed when they found out about the reduction of days. If this change is disappointing to even the players who are competing in this new era, you know that this is a serious problem. Another problem with the new era is that every season feels like a copy and paste of the previous ones. Sure, it's going to feel like the show is eventually going to end up repeating itself when it has gone on for as long as Survivor has, but the main difference is that the producers tried to come up with different gameplay mechanics and casting themes to make it feel like each season has their own unique identity, and for the most part, it worked. Now it just feels like they're phoning in the same season over and over again with little changes aside from just slapping a big 41, 42, 43, or 44 on the season's logo. 3 tribes of 6 divided by random with no tribe swaps, the Earn the Merge portion where the remaining players are split into 2 teams and compete in a challenge with the winning group earning their merge buff and being safe from tribal, while the losing group is up for elimination, the summits where one castaway from each tribe takes a journey and decide whether or not they want to risk their vote for an advantage, and those beware advantages where a player must do a task with the penalty for not doing it, resulting in that player losing their vote for the next how many tribal councils. Hell, even the puzzles and challenges are being recycled and the players are taking advantage of that by making their own Survivor challenges at home. What's worse is that production actually praises the players for making their own challenges and practicing them at home rather than just investing the time and resources into making entirely new challenges and puzzles. Another big example of the show shamelessly repeating itself would be how they just copied and pasted all the gameplay mechanics and twists from Survivor 41 straight to Survivor 42 with minimal changes. The reason they did this was solely because they aired 2 seasons back to back. What this means is that Survivor 41 didn't even air when they were filming Survivor 42, so the players didn't even know that the twists from their season were copied and pasted over from the previous season. This is a problem because repeating the same exact format over and over again makes the seasons feel less unique and in turn feel more forgettable than they already are. Another change that was made in the new era is that the jury votes for the sole survivor are now read on the island with an after show immediately after. This is different compared to seasons past where Jeff Probst would not read the jury votes until all the cast members have returned to the United States and the season has finished airing, where the jury votes would then be read live on stage. Announcing the winner on location is a bad thing because not only do we not get to see how the players have tidied themselves up long after they have left the location, but doing the after show immediately after casting the jury votes for a winner feels like such a gut punch to the finalists who lost the jury vote. I don't know about you, but if I found out that I just lost $1 million, I would just want to be left alone to myself for a little while. If you even watch any of the after shows from 41 onwards, you could see that the losing finalists are clearly bummed out, and rightfully so. At least with live finales, the losing finalists get to see how they were portrayed in the edit and get a general understanding of how they might or might not lose the game, but when announcing the winner on the island, they get no edit to give them any hints as to whether or not they won or lost, making those losses feel much more devastating to them. In fact, Survivor 43 castaway Owen Knight expressed his distaste for announcing the winner on location with the after show immediately after, and for those reasons that I have previously mentioned. After expressing all the flaws with the format of the new era, let's move on to the next flawed area, that being the casting. For those of you who don't know who she is, Lynn Spillman was the casting director for the show's first 38 seasons, and has given us some of the show's most memorable and colorful contestants. Even though a lot of Survivor fans probably don't know who she is, she played a monumental role in shaping the show through her casting choices. In 2019, CBS fired Lynn Spillman and a new casting director, Jesse Tannenbaum, took the role from there on out. Jesse's first 2 seasons as casting director weren't that noticeable of a difference as his first season, Island of the Idols, consisted mostly of alternates from the Lynn Spillman era, and yes, that includes the one controversial contestant of that season, while Jesse's second season, Winners at War, was an all-star season and consisted entirely of players that were originally cast by Lynn. But once the new era came along, you really started to notice the change in casting. Sure, Lynn Spillman wasn't perfect, and she struck out a few times, but would you rather have someone that struck out a few times but had much higher highs, or someone who was just consistently mediocre all around. There's a saying that goes, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. If there's one job that fits that quote to a T, it would be casting director, because you may not know if the box of chocolates is going to be full of those rich dark chocolates and the ones with the caramel filling, or if it's going to be full of those crappy ones with the raspberry filling in them. Sure, if you were a casting director, you could try to get a general idea of how this person is going to act on the show through interviewing them, but for the most part, you're really not going to know until you actually cast them. With what I have just mentioned, you might be asking yourself, if casting is like a box of chocolates, how would Jesse Tannenbaum be worse if he's implementing that same box of chocolates approach as Lynn? Well, thing is about that, he really isn't using that approach, and that brings me on to my next point. The main difference between Lynn and Jesse is that Lynn wasn't afraid to take risks when casting and tried to shake things up to keep the casting fresh and interesting. Meanwhile, Jesse just sticks to the same cookie-cutter casting choices season after season. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, let's take a look at the most recent season, Survivor 44, and break down the cast by each of the 3 starting tribes. If you look closely enough, you'll notice that the men for the season fall into one of 3 categories. You've got the muscle, the nerd, and the gay, with each of the 3 tribes having exactly one of those types per tribe. It isn't just the men that end up falling into this extremely broadened casting mentality. The same applies to the women as well. The women for that season felt like they fall into one of 3 categories as well, those being the quirky, the boss chick who wants to take control, and the quiet observer. What's even worse is that 44 isn't the only season to fall victim to this extremely formulaic casting template. The same can apply to another new era season, like Survivor 42, for both the men and the women. What's even worse is that for those archetypes I just mentioned, they go all out on those archetypes, to the point where they feel like straight up caricatures rather than actual human beings. Examples of this are how the most muscular men work the most generic brawny jobs, whether that would be a former professional athlete, a firefighter, or the rattiest of gym rats. Or how most of the nerds and quirky girls are either in a good college or law school, working a medical job, or working in Silicon Valley. Funny that every new era cast was formed under a 50% BIPOC mandate, yet the cast themselves managed to feel less diverse than previous Survivor casts. This casting problem harkens back to the repetition problem that I have previously mentioned in the format aspect. It's unfortunate that the repetition that I had previously mentioned is also a problem with casting as well. That's just one problem I have with Tannenbaum's casting, though there are more problems to it than that. I know what you're thinking, and yes, I'm aware that most, if not all of the people who apply to be on the show are superfans, because who else would want to voluntarily strand themselves on an island for a month with nothing but the clothes on their backs? Well, unless they're doing it for the fame or the money. But the thing is, it feels like Jesse is only taking the fact that they're diehard fans of the show into consideration. Let me go more into detail about what I mean. When Lynn Spillman was casting director, she tried to cast people because she thought they were interesting as individuals rather than because they wanted to be on Survivor. As a result, Lynn's casting choices felt stronger because having a cast full of superfans makes the cast feel very samey. Not only do they all share a love for the show, but it also impacts every aspect of that player, from their confessionals to their gameplay and even their mood. The confessionals of superfans generally stem from how they're stoked to finally play the game of Survivor and want to cross so many things off their bucket list during their time on the island. It affects gameplay since they've practically seen every season of the show. It just makes the gameplay feel very meta. Why I think that's a bad thing is because these superfans say the same jargon over and over again. Examples of this recycled jargon are, I want to make this big move because it would help build my resume, or that person is totally a goal who has no chance of winning this game. Having a cast full of people who talk like this make the cast feel less unique. Being a superfan affects their attitude because not only are they going to mention how being on Survivor is their lifelong dream and how they're finally excited to do it for the 500th time, but they're not going to try to start trouble with other players either. This is a problem because a lot of the show's entertainment stems from the other players starting shit with each other, and without the fighting, the game just becomes a month-long kumbaya retreat with little to no entertainment value. This is why I believe it's better to cast people based on how interesting they are as individuals rather than casting them based on how much they love Survivor. There's also one more casting problem that I would like to talk about. villains have pretty much been a core aspect of what helped Survivor become the show that it is today. From their tendencies to stir up drama at camp, their ruthless gameplay which involves crushing the dreams of others to get to where they are, and their overall tendency to crank the misery dial on the island all the way up to 11. Now, after all that I mentioned about how the villains helped shape the show, you're now wondering, why doesn't Survivor want to cast villains anymore? To be honest, I really wish I could provide a solid answer to that question, but if I had to find a reason, my best guess is that Jeff Probst is trying to make Survivor a more kid-friendly show. This is evident from the fact that he mentioned in a few interviews that he wanted to make the show more kid-friendly, and he even started encouraging high school students to sign up for Survivor, and even introduced the stupid game within the game thing for Survivor 41, where he explicitly said that it was for junior Survivor players. Another possible theory that I have is that social media also plays a role in this. This is because during the show's 39th season, Island of the Idols, there were two players that lied about how one player's inappropriate touching made them feel uncomfortable as a way of lying to the person that they were going to vote out, with the person who did end up getting voted out at that episode actually feeling uncomfortable by his advances. Those two players were constantly being sent death threats on social media, particularly Twitter, about how they treated a serious issue like sexual harassment as a means for furthering themselves in the game. That incident I had just mentioned was the first, and so far, only incident where anything like this has ever happened. And to avoid further controversies, Probst and the CBS executives were just like, screw it, no more villains. I think this was too harsh of a measure because, sure, what those two did was bad, but a few sour grapes shouldn't ruin it for the whole vine. Those are all of the problems that I have with the casting aspect of the show. Now let's move on to the final aspect that I mentioned at the beginning, that being the gameplay. This problem was prevalent even before the new era happened. Hell, there was even a season that was literally called Island of the Idols. The new era made absolutely no effort to reverse this trend. An example of how advantage heavy the new era is would have to be in the premiere episode of Survivor 42, where in the very first challenge of the season, one castaway from each tribe got these advantage amulets where the player could hold on to the amulets until they were voted out, with the catch being the less amulets there are in the game, the more powerful they become. In that very episode, one person from each tribe went to the summit where the castaways would choose to either risk their vote or protect their vote. The catch is that if all three players chose to risk their vote, then they would all lose their vote at their next tribal council. But if at least one player chooses to protect their vote, then the other players who chose to risk will get an extra vote, kind of like the prisoner's dilemma. The summit resulted in just one castaway choosing to protect their vote with the other two choosing to risk, with both of them getting extra votes. So in the very first episode of Survivor 42, there are already 5 advantages in the game, and that's not even including the 3 hidden immunity idols that were found in later episodes. They also added new advantages in the new era, and they're stupidly overpowered. One of those overpowered advantages being the knowledge is power advantage, where a castaway can ask anyone if they have an idol or an advantage, and they must give it to them. When there's an advantage that allows a player to steal other advantages, that's how you know there are a lot of advantages in the new era. Thankfully, the knowledge is power advantage was never successfully used, but the thought of it even existing just shows how much of a problem that this is. This doesn't even include the shot in the dark die. What this advantage does is that at the start of the game, each castaway receives a 6-sided die. If a player perceives certain trouble at Tribal Council, they may invoke the shot in the dark die at any point until the final 7. To do so, the player will not vote and instead insert their die in a smaller urn next to the regular voting urn, after which the player will select one of many rolled up parchments from a container. The player takes their selected scroll to their seat until Jeff returns with the voting urn. When Jeff asks someone if someone wants to play their advantage or a hidden immunity idol, the player or players who use the shot in the dark must present their still unopened scroll. If it reads safe, then all votes cast against them will be negated, similar to how a regular idol is played. If the scroll reads not safe, all votes cast against that player will remain valid and the gamble is considered unsuccessful. As of Survivor 44, this shot in the dark was used 9 times since its introduction in Survivor 41 and was only successful once. with that one successful use not mattering since they didn't receive any votes at that tribal council. The oversaturation of idols and advantages kind of strays away from what the game was originally about, a game where you must work together and form strong relationships to outlast the competition into a contest for who can get their hands on the most toys. I have no problems with a hidden immunity idol or an advantage every now and then, but if it's become so oversaturated to the point where it feels like these advantages start controlling the gameplay more than the social relations, then that's a serious problem. Not only are there a lot of idols and advantages, but there are also a lot of twists exclusive to the new era that I think ended up falling flat. One example of this would be the Hourglass twist that was prevalent in both Survivor 41 and Survivor 42. The Hourglass twist was present in the Earn the Merge challenge, where the final 12 castaways were split into 2 groups of 5 with 2 non-participants. After this challenge, the winning group can choose which of the 2 non-participants they want to be immune with them, with the other player living alone on Exile Island. While on Exile Island, Jeff Probst visits the castaway and gives them a mallet and an hourglass, and tells them that if the person breaks the hourglass, the results of the challenge are undone and the group that lost is now safe, along with the player who smashed the hourglass, while the 6 who won are now the ones in danger of going home. After describing that, you now know the problem. The twist is basically just, here, smash this hourglass and you're immune, free of consequences. The CBS executives really didn't think that twist through, because both times the twist was used, the player who was on Exile Island ended up smashing the hourglass. Another example of a really bad twist was the Do or Die twist, which, much like the hourglass twist, was in both Survivor 41 and 42. The summary of the twist is, at the final 7, the castaways must choose to either compete or sit out of an endurance challenge, with the catch being, the first person who drops out of the endurance challenge has to play Do or Die. At Tribal Council, the player then plays the game of Do or Die, where Jeff has 3 boxes, with only one of those boxes granting safety and the other 2 resulting in automatic elimination. From there, the player must pick one of 3 boxes. After the player picks a box, Jeff will open one of the bad boxes, and after doing that, will ask if they want to switch or stick with the box they chose, much like the Monty Hall problem. If the player ends up picking the safe box, they are immune, and Tribal will continue as normal. If the castaways ends up picking the die box, they are automatically eliminated. Luckily, both times this twist was used, the player who had to play Do or Die ended up being safe, with a normal vote happening immediately after. This was awful because having the worst performing player in a challenge determine their fate through a game of chance rather than a normal vote kind of undermines the core aspect of what the game is about. There was also one more awful twist that was in Survivor 44, where the Merge tribe was divided into 2 teams and competed in an endurance challenge. The last person standing from each team will win individual immunity, and the last person left standing overall will win immunity and reward for their whole team. In addition, the winning team will abstain from voting at Tribal Council. The problem with this stems from the fact that the castaway that won immunity for their team, Franny, ended up losing her closest ally, Matt, as a result of this. Since Matt was on the other team, and Franny couldn't vote due to her having individual immunity, and couldn't do anything but watch Matt get his torch snuffed. In other words, Franny got penalized for winning, albeit indirectly. Those are just some of the horrendous twists that the new era has spewed out of its swampy anus. What makes it worse is how the players react to those twists and advantages. One more problem with the new era is that the oversaturation of idols and advantages, along with the introduction of these bad twists that I mentioned earlier, is that it encourages safe gameplay. Since the new era casts are full of superfans who have seen practically every season of the show, they know what they have to do in order to not get voted out. Because the new era format consists of having 3 tribes with no swaps until the merge, tribal relations don't mean squat in the grander scheme of things, and the post-merge strategy almost always boils down to just dogpiling on all of the threats. An example of this would be in Survivor 43, where Noelle and Sammy made a big move at the final 10 to blindside James, which resulted in Noelle using her steal a vote advantage coupled with Sammy turning on his alliance to blindside James. Immediately after that, Noelle and Sammy were the next 2 players to go. At the final 6, the power duo of the season, Cody and Jesse, started to splinter due to Jesse fearing that he was going to be seen as Cody's number 2 to the jury, which resulted in him blindsiding Cody at the final 6. At the Final 5, Jesse played an idol which resulted in the next biggest threat, Carla, going home. And at the Final 4, Jesse lost the final immunity challenge which led to him losing firemaking against Gabler, which sent him to the jury. This resulted in an underwhelming Final 3 of Gabler, Cassidy, and Owen due to the threats cannibalizing each other. As for why this is a problem, I'll let former Survivor contestant Rafe Judkins explain it himself. If Jesse plays a great game, he doesn't go to the Final 4 with people who vote him out for sure unless he wins the final immunity/fire challenge. A Final 4 vote encourages great players to bring other great players to the end who are also threats to win, so you're not the automatic vote. The current structure, with Final 3 instead of Final 2 and a fire-making challenge, incentivizes great players to make sure that no other great players make it to the end game. That's why you have no interesting final tribal councils with close votes, and the finales are now unsatisfying storytelling-wise. If I'm a great player in Survivor now, I'm incentivized by the game structure to bring 4 bad players to the Final 5, use one of my trinkets or idols to survive Final 5, and then have 2 good shots at challenges to make it to the final tribal council and win. So why risk bringing other great players to the end? I know both Final 3 and the fire-making challenge are designed to help great players get to the end, but that's actually doing the opposite and making it smarter to eliminate all the great players even earlier. Survivor players are smart and they'll do what the game incentivizes them to do. To be honest, I don't think I could have said that any better myself. Survivor has clearly changed for its new era, and those changes were mostly for the worse. This is a shame because the show has changed so much from what it previously was to the point where it doesn't even feel like the same show anymore. Sure, you could argue that some change is good, and I agree, but when those changes end up causing a disruption to the core gameplay and end up making the experience worse, then that's not a good change. Hell, even there are some international versions of the show, particularly the Australian and South African versions of the show, that took heavy inspiration from the US version of Survivor and are arguably much better shows than the US version in its current state. As for the future of US Survivor, judging by the first impressions I saw for Survivor 45, it looks like a lot of those flaws from the new era are going to be returning as well. While Survivor 45 doesn't look like it'll show any signs of undoing the flaws that poisoned this new era, I am cautiously optimistic about one change. The change that I am cautiously optimistic about is that all episodes this season are going to be 90 minutes long compared to the standard 60 minutes due to the writer's strike that's currently going on. Why I'm cautiously optimistic about the 90-minute episode format is because while it feels nice to get an even better understanding of what's going on the show with the extra half hour of runtime, I'm afraid that the runtime might be squandered on irrelevant things, such as allocating the extra runtime on explaining what the advantages are or making tribal councils way longer than what they need to be. Will the extra runtime be put to good use? Only time will tell. I don't want this essay to make it feel like I'm hating on this show because I'm not. I'm making this video out of concern for the future of the show, and I, along with many others, have those same feelings. I personally like to remember this show for what it was, rather than what it has become, and after saying everything that I needed to say, I think I have an idea of what kind of monster Jeff is referring to.